said, this is boring beginnings. If that's not where you're meant to be, it's too late. The door's locked. You can't get out. So, I'm just going to point at you. Am I on that advance? Thank you. This is me. I'm Christopher Baxter. I'm currently a freelance editor. I'm also the author of the Story Polisher blog, which is a blog that is full of writing tips for writers looking to improve their prose. You will be able to find this presentation on there afterwards. So, it might be worth looking at. My most recent publication is a short story called The Wizard's Granddaughter, Deep Magic, October issue. It's a great magazine. Even if you don't pick up my issue, pick up one, because I love their stories. So, let's get to it. Boring beginnings. I have rejected stories, working in magazines, helping with anthologies. I have edited a whole lot more stories, working as a freelance editor, working for editing groups in the area. And I've seen a lot of common mistakes. When you do this long enough, you read enough stories, you edit enough stories, you start to see some repeated flaws in all of those stories. Now, one of the biggest is just prose errors, people not knowing how to write. The next one after that is just beginnings that don't grab you. You hear that a lot from editors. It didn't grab me, it just wasn't me. That's not always a boring beginning problem. Sometimes you just get unlucky. That editor just wasn't interested. They read 3 bajillion zombie stories in the last 2 days, and when yours came along, you had no chance. But often, it is a genuine flaw in the beginning of the story. So, I've gone through a whole bunch of those beginnings that I've looked at, and I have gathered up some common patterns there. And I've distilled it down into 5 types of boring beginnings. So let's start with the first game. First one is starting too early. There's going to be a lot of these. So most stories begin with an introduction of characters and setting, followed by an inciting incident that sets off the actual plot. Stories that begin too early spend way too long in those introductions. I want you to picture Toy Story. It's got a great little introduction at the beginning, Andy playing with his toys. And then it segues into, hey, there's a party that's about to go down, and bam, we have a story. We have conflict, and we still spend time introducing the characters. We actually get to meet their personalities when they're not static, being played with by a boy. But imagine if that story started a day earlier. With Andy playing with his toys, we got to meet all the toys, we got to watch them all go to sleep, we watch them get up the next morning and get played with again, and then we got a birthday party, and everyone started getting nervous. That'd just be way too much, right? But that happens all the time. Now, this is actually one of the less frequent ones. I'm really proud of all y'all. Y'all been watching Writing Excuses, and you've heard In Laid Out Early, and so you've been fixing this, and that's great. It doesn't happen too often, but it does still happen. They often get lost in the minutiae of day-to-day activities or world building. The example they gave on Writing Excuses once was, a story about a bank heist that starts with the banker waking up in the morning, brushing his teeth, getting cleaned up, getting dressed, eating breakfast, kissing his wife and kids goodbye, walking to work, getting stuck in traffic, something like that, getting to work, working for a few hours, and then thieves hit the bank. That's just boring, right? Nobody wants to read about our mundane lives. That's not why we're here. We're escaping. So, the next one, starting too far away, aka the cinematic opening. These beginnings usually open, these are very, very consistent. They usually open with a description of a landscape or a city, helicopter shot, right? We zoom in from that starting view, we keep getting more and more detail as we move along, following the river or whatever. We get a figure in the distance. We spot them, we move in closer to them, we get a physical description of them. We get a description of their movement, what they're doing, how they might be feeling, but we're not in their heads yet, so we don't know for sure. And then, we jump into the viewpoint character's head, and we're moving along. A great example of this, most of these I can't give you specific examples of, but fortunately, Brandon Sanderson gave us his original draft of White Sand in episode 4.29 of Writing Excuses, where they were doing line edits on this, and this was the problem he had there. We got all these descriptions of beautiful sand dunes and wind moving along them, caressing them, and he actually skipped over several pages of that before we finally got to the viewpoint character, who wasn't the viewpoint character yet because he had to describe him first. Right. Now, this works in movies really well, because it just takes a few seconds, right? It's a beautiful shot, we don't have to be that patient, we watch it zoom in and then bam, we got some characters and some action. But what takes seconds in a movie can take pages and pages in a book. We are not a visual medium. We don't work that way, and so when we try to be too heavily visual, it gets very long and can get rather tedious. Okay, next one. Reflecting the info dump opening is probably a better title for this, but I like to call it reflecting. Because these again are very consistent. You see them over and over again. They focus on characters standing around thinking about all the backstory that happened before the story begins. And this happens a lot. Maybe you'll have someone waiting, it's like, oh, that baby that I'm supposed to sacrifice isn't here yet. I'm going to stand here and wait for it. I'm going to look at that cliff over there and think about why we're doing this ceremony. And then I'm going to look at these trees over here. And I'm going to think about my organization that I'm part of, and how justified we really are, even though people don't know. Then I'm going to check my watch and tap my foot impatiently. I'm going to look over here again. And I'm going to think about the good guys that are trying to stop us and how they think they're good, but really they're not. And then I'm going to look over here. Okay, someone's approaching. And now I'm going to reflect on that person and their backstory. Yeah, they're a great guy. Okay, let's get on with this plot. That's basically how these go. And the reason for that is every story needs a lot of backstory, right? Especially in our genres here. Science fiction, fantasy, there's so much to get across to the reader right at the opening. But this is not the way to do it. Or they'll just be looking at people and things and thinking about their histories. So they might be standing, and a great example of this one actually is again from Writing Excuses, episode 5.16, critiquing Dan's first novel. Same thing as White Sands, we never got a title for this one, Dan's capstone course project or something. But it opens with a guard, Fenrir, standing in a castle, watching things happen. Watching everyone be agitated, and he looks at the king and thinks about the king's history, and he looks around the castle and thinks about the castle's history. And then he looks at the tapestry on the wall and thinks about the battle that tapestry depicts. And it takes a long time. This happens a lot. And take solace, if you've done this, in the fact that that's how Brandon and Dan started too. We all do this. I've done these, everyone has. Now, even action can't save these beginnings. I've seen a few people who thought they weren't doing this because they had some action going on. Read a story once that was, it was a man, or it was a woman who has just escaped from a prison cell. She's in an underground facility. She's running for her life from the guards. That sounds awesome, right? But in reality what it was is she was running down a hallway, running, and thinking about how she ended up imprisoned here. These people are so awful. And then she dodged around the corner, dodged past some guards, was going up the stairs and thinking about her daughter that she misses so much and she needs to find. And then she dodges past some more guards and she dodges again, and then she's thinking about what she's going to do when she gets out, and the things that she was doing before she got captured and what she's going to do. Yes?
Just a quick question on so this could have, well, aside from the fact that there's obviously way too much info dump on in between action scenes, if you condense it to like maybe a questioning statement like, why did I take it? You take that thing, or hinting at something that could be explained later. Could that work?
Yes, actually it can. And I'm going to cover that. I should have led with this, I'm sorry. The first section of this is the problems. The second section of this is going to be the solutions. So we'll cover that soon. And I'm going to take the rest of the questions at the end. But thank you. I forgot to mention that, and I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Now, a lot of the reason these things happen is because, like I said, there's a lot to get across, and we want to avoid the white room syndrome, right? We get a lot of the reflecting or the watching or the cinematic opening because we want to make sure people know where they're at. And that's a good goal, but it needs to be very succinctly. Next one, please. Too much detail. Now this gets related, like I said, to the cinematic opening, to the starting too early opening, but you can start just on time, and you cannot give us that cinematic opening and still have too much detail. In version 1 of this, just excessive detail about unimportant action or description, and that can be very unimportant. I read a story once where characters were walking down a hallway while they're talking and having a conversation that's establishing some stuff, actually not too poorly done. And then they walked up to the door, and he reached out for the lever-shaped handle, and he took hold of it, and he pushed it down. And then he pulled the door open, and then he stepped through, and then he reached out and took that other handle on the other side, and he pulled it shut behind him. That's too much. I don't need you to tell me how a door works. I know how a door works. That's too much detail. To make matters worse, so was the entire hallway. That hallway didn't need to be there. Half of that conversation didn't need to be there. It was all just too much detail. He could have put that in a much more interesting setting, made it much more short, and it would have worked a lot better. And it's even worse when these actions and descriptions become repetitive. So if we jump back to that example I gave, the woman escaping the prison, running through the hallways, and dodging guards, and then reflecting, and then dodging guards, and then reflecting, and then dodging guards, and reflecting. She was dodging them in a slightly different way every time. They might have had a slightly different weapon, or be coming from a slightly different angle. But in the end, all it was is dodge, reflect, run, dodge, reflect, run, dodge, reflect, run. And it got pretty tedious, a little too repetitive. You need to look at those actions and remember that, yeah, you've got a picture up here, but that doesn't mean that your audience does. Which is the problem with version 2. Painstakingly describing every movement of a cinematically detailed action scene. AKA, trying to Salvatore, or trying to Brandon. Because if you've read R.A. Salvatore's books, if you've read Brandon Sanderson's books, they're very good at this, right? We all love Keltsier's fight scenes in Mistborn. Beautifully detailed. And it's surprisingly easy to follow. Brandon does a good job of this. But it is very difficult to do. And right at the opening is not generally the place for that. I don't need a blow-by-blow fight scene right at the beginning. That's just going to get tedious. And the reason for that is the next one. There are no stakes. These beginnings fail to explain the why behind the action. Action without meaning is spectacle. Like, we need to connect with the characters, we need to know what they're trying to do, and why it matters to them. Because if it matters to them, it'll probably start mattering to your reader. Otherwise, it's spectacle. Now, spectacle is an okay thing. I love some spectacle. We all love to go to a Marvel movie and watch an awesome action scene. There's emotions behind it, but even if they weren't, we'd still be going, hey, yeah, that's cool. But spectacle doesn't carry books like it does movies. Movies are not a purely, but a wholly visual medium that can rely on spectacle much more. So James Bond can have an introductory action sequence that doesn't actually connect to the rest of the plot, doesn't really have any stakes beyond, is James going to muss up his tie this time or his hair? And that's okay because it's fun to watch. It's not as fun to read. Again, it goes back to what takes seconds in movies will take pages in books, especially when you're describing this kind of action. And readers have trouble figuring out why they should care in these situations. And emotions, that is the forte of books. We can get in people's heads. We can connect with them on an emotional level. And that is what we do best here. And often, these stories begin in medias res. If you don't know what that means, it means in the middle of affairs, in the midst of affairs, I believe. And it basically means we're starving right in the middle of the story, we're just hitting the ground running, which can be great. It skips the problem of starting too early, but it often creates the opposite problem of starting too late. I don't want an info dump, but I do still need some understanding of what's going on before I can care about what's happening. So, those are my 5 boring beginnings. I see these all the time, left and right. Let's talk about how to fix each of them. First, starting too early. Start it later. You didn't need me to tell you that, but it bears repeating. Next one, please. Find your inciting incident. Now, I hope you're all reasonably familiar with the hero's journey, with 7-point story structure, 5-point story structure, all the different story structures. You don't have to have them all memorized, but you have to know the basics of introducing characters, inciting incident, getting to the plot. Find that inciting incident and put your beginning as close to that as you can manage. There's going to be some backstory filling in a bit here and there. We need to understand the characters and everything, like I said, but we want that space to be minimal. We want to see Andy play with his toys, and then bam, birthday party, we have a conflict, we have a concern, and we're moving. And in fact, that introductory sequence there is even a bit too long for books. We don't want to watch Andy play with his toys in a book. We want to watch those toys be concerned with what's happening. If it's not directly related to the story, get rid of it. Especially in these ones that start too early, that have too much detail. Just cut it out mercilessly. I don't care if it's a darling, just throw it by the sidelines. Now, you might end up with the bare bones that are a little too bare. You might look at that and go, oh, but there were some details that were fun here that took up no time. That's great. Put those back in afterwards. But when you get down to your core story here, clean it up, and then pepper those in judicially here and there. That's a much cleaner way to do it if you have this problem. Another option is to start in medias res, start in the midst of affairs, and then have a flashback. You've seen the movie Iron Man, which of course you've seen the movie Iron Man. that's how this begins, right? It begins with Tony Stark riding some soldiers in a caravan in a convoy in the Mideast. And then boom, explosions, shooting, shrapnel in the chest, fade to title, and flashback. Be careful with this. It can be a good option, but you gotta be careful about it. You gotta remember that in Iron Man, part of the reason that worked is because a lot of the people coming to that movie already knew the basics of this character and this plot. They're already on board with what's happening. So it's okay if they start in the middle and then they just jump somewhere else, and then they have to watch a lot of life being lived, Randall Thor style, before they get back to the action. You also don't have Robert Downey Jr. to entertain people. That makes things a lot more difficult. So if we're starting too far away, get closer. Again, very simple, but landscape can be very interesting, especially in our genres. We've got beautiful fantasy landscapes. We've got awesome, stellar sci-fi settings. But character is still going to be what carries your story. Character is what people are going to connect with, what is going to give them the dramatic moments that a book does best. Not that distant cinematic landscape. You can still have that landscape. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but give it to us through the character's eyes. See, we need paragraphs that are doing more than one thing. If you are telling me what the setting looks like through the character's eyes, then I'm also getting some of the character. I'm learning about this person whose head I'm inside after. Sorry, thank you. And you're doing double duty. You're giving me a setting and you're giving me a character all at once. It's a lot more succinct. Also, keep it short. If these landscapes are long enough that I start forgetting what the action was about, forgetting what the story is, what our goal is, that's much too long. Remember, it's a book, not a movie. Play to the strengths of the medium. There's nothing wrong with loving movies. There's nothing wrong with wanting your book to be made into a movie. But it's not a movie yet. And don't try and make it one, because that'll cripple it as a book. Okay, the reflecting input I'm hoping. Characters need to have, actually, I'm going to go back real quick. You can leave it, that's fine. With the reflecting, with giving landscape, there's nothing wrong with, that doesn't mean I need to start right in a character's head, give me a line or give me a thought. You can start with landscape. Look at Mistborn. Ash fell from the sky. And that's, I believe I'm paraphrasing the opening line there, it might be exact. He gives us the ash, he gives us a bit of the setting, but it's just a paragraph or so before characters start happening. And so there's nothing wrong with starting with that setting, because we don't want a white room. But just don't give us that cinematic helicopter shot. Okay. Character needs to have a focus, a purpose. They can't just be standing around thinking. They have to be doing something, even if that is very little. I'm not saying that we all have to be running down hallways at the beginning of our stories, trying to escape guards. But they got to have a goal or concern that's simple to convey, easy for the audience to understand. We're in science fiction and fantasy. A lot of the time, our goals are not simple or easy to understand to a foreign audience, to someone who is not part of this world, doesn't already understand this world. But that doesn't mean that their goals can't be. If someone is in an apocalyptic setting that we don't all already know about, but their goal is just to try and get a Twinkie, aka Zombieland, we can get that, and we can connect with that. We all love Twinkies. We brought them back from the brink of destruction. We love them so much. And like I said, it doesn't have to be action-packed, but it shouldn't slow down the action. Again, having moments of reflection are okay. We need some backstory. People do think about the backstory of things when they look at them sometimes. There's nothing wrong with taking half a paragraph, a few lines, or a very small paragraph to go, this is why I was here, or this is what that is, and then move along. But again, if it slows down the action, if it takes so long that I start forgetting why we're here and what we're actually doing, that's way too much. That is an input out. If you can't cut it all down, if there's just so much reflection here and you can't figure out how to make it succinct enough for this to work, you might have started your story today. If all that stuff is so fascinating that we just have to have it now, go back and show it to us. I just did this on a story of mine. I started it up and I was like, great, we're going to do this, we're going to get to the action, and then I went back and I went, no, there's too much I got to convey, I'm going to jump back here. And I started writing and then I got down this far and went, let's move that back in further. Now we're set. Now it's beautiful. It's neat. Too much detail. why are all these details important? Obviously, opening a door, how to turn a door handle and open it is not important. But that hallway wasn't that important either. What they were talking about wasn't that important. Look at them. Do they service the story in some way? Do they advance the plot? Do they give us character? Do they establish setting? Do you really need them right now? This is the beginning. This is the hook. This is the action-packed sequence that is going to sell this to your readers. If there's anything you can leave out until later, it might be a good idea to do that. If it's not, just cut them now. If it turns out you cut too much, you can always go back and pepper them in later. Look for that repetitive action, the third dodge in a row. You might have 3 paragraphs in a row where your character dodges something. Your readers are going to notice that, even if it's not conscious. And they're going to get a little tired. And when you find that, cut it out. Mistborn again. This is a great example of this. We're going to look at the action scene. It might be cool, but it's also going to be confusing. The last thing you want to do is confuse your readers at the beginning. And in Mistborn, we have all these awesome fight scenes. Brandon liked those, he used those, and it worked well, but he didn't open his book on that. And he once talked about that in either Writing Excuses or one of his classes at BYU. He talked about his original draft for Mistborn did have a ridiculously awesome action scene. We started with this lord abusing his ska and everything, and then we jump to the ska, and I'm talking to this mysterious stranger, and the mysterious stranger goes up to the Lord's house and slaughters everyone. Originally, that slaughtering everyone was an action scene. He fought a bunch of guards, he fought the Lord himself, he was also an allomancer of some sort. There was this big convoluted action scene, and then finally Brandon came back and went, what is this doing for me? Do I really need this? Am I just confusing people? And his writing group said, yes, you're just confusing people. And so he cut it out. Now, that scene opens with, here's these lords talking, here's these ska being all downtrodden, here's this man getting upset about it, and mysteriously going and slaughtering everyone, and how the heck did he do that, and now we have to leave. It's a great scene, it establishes a lot of curious questions, and then it moves along. Remember, the simpler it is, the easier it is for your audience to understand, and for you to write. Writing those action scenes coherently is hard. It is a difficult thing to do, and even the best of them can cause a lot of double takes and stuff. Go read Mistborn again, go pick up an R.A. Salvatore book, and read some of those action scenes. And try and count how many times you go, wait, what happened? It still happens, even in these ones that sold well. And those guys are masters of it. They know what they're doing. We're not masters of it. I certainly not. When I get to an action scene, I'll try and write the action, and then I keep cutting it out over and over again. Like, you know what? I don't actually need that punch to the face. I don't actually need that knee to the stomach. You know what? This would be a lot simpler if I just said they fought. And then I'm going to move on. Now, obviously, you don't have to necessarily carry it down that far, but keep the pace moving. Don't get lost in mindless detail. And again, because that often ruins the stakes. So stakes. Who is this character? What is their goal? Why does it matter? Those are the big questions of start. Now, setting's still important. We don't want a white room, but these are the things that are going to carry your novel. I can deal with a little confusion about the setting. I can deal with a little bit of white room if I've got someone to root for and care about. I don't even have to like what they're doing. As long as I can understand it, we can deal. Next, please. Now, the opening stakes don't have to be the same stakes that drive the story. I've got a friend in my writing group that has a story that begins with an entertaining action scene. You've got a floating skyship that is fighting a pirate mechanic, and there's things being thrown around and shot, and action happening, and the crew of the ship struggling to keep their ship in the air and get to safety. Now, that's not the plot of the story. That's just the plot of the opening scene. But she uses that to effectively establish all the characters. We get to meet all of them. We get some really great shots of the captain swashbuckling and crashing that ship into the repair yards and coming out and saying, hey, we need some repairs. Aren't I awesome? And it's great. It's a great beginning. Afterwards, if you can write it down, remember it. It's not the stakes that drive the story, but there are stakes. We are going, oh, these people are interesting. Their ship is falling. They're fighting bad guys. Cool. I'm on board with this. That's enough to keep my interest. Maybe not every editor, but I'll stay on board with that. So you don't have to immediately establish, this is what my story's about, so this is where we're going to be. It doesn't have to be your elevator page. All it has to be is something with enough interest to engage you. The simpler the stakes are, the simpler the who, what, and why is, at least your description of it in this opening scene, the more that it ties into emotions and situations with which your reader is familiar, the better they will drive the story. So, for another example from my writing group, I have a friend, it's the friend who's sitting right here, who's advancing the slides for me. She has a story that opens on a woman pinned under some rubble. Now, this is not an action-packed scene. This is another example of how you can do these scenes without action. She is pinned under rubble, and she cannot move, but it is dramatic. There are stakes because she is pinned under that rubble, sheltering her newborn twin babies. And one of them is screaming and crying, and she cannot get to her and check and see how she's doing. And the other one is not screaming and crying, and she cannot get to him and check and see how he is doing. Feel the stakes? Yeah, we're all feeling that, and that was just me describing it. It's a great opening scene. It's one of the rare instances where nothing happening, where a little bit of reflection actually increases the tension, because she is sitting there unable to do something, and we all care about babies. We're all hardwired to care about those babies. They're so adorable. Have one. And this story terrifies me every time. It's a great opening, because it establishes the stakes. You can have action, you cannot have action, as long as you've got these stakes. So, but I've read a book that does that. You've read something, I guarantee it, you've read something that has one of these openings, or has something similar to one of these openings. I know it. As I was writing this, I was thinking about all these things in my head. It's like, oh, well, there is that book. Yeah, but, well. Let's talk about why that happens in books, and why you still shouldn't do it. First, established authors get more leeway than you. It's a hard truth. Brandon Sanderson, we all have read his books. We all know we're going to enjoy something he writes. His publishers know that we're going to enjoy something that he writes, more importantly. So if he decides he wants to tack 2 prologues onto the beginning of a doorstopper book, he can do that, and we'll all let him get away with that. For now. But I can't do that. You can't do that. I don't know you. I don't trust you yet. I don't have a feel for your capability to spin me a yarn that I'm really going to enjoy. So you have to do things really great right from the get-go. You don't got the leeway that we all wish we could have, that we all someday will have, and hope we don't fall into the trap of abusing. Or, another option. Writing conventions have evolved. Lord of the Rings has a very slow, drawn-out beginning, doesn't it? That was 60 years ago, more than 60 years ago. People wrote differently back then. People read differently back then. Charles Dickens got paid by the word, so he dragged those stories out, and people put up with it because they were hard up for entertainment those days. We are not hard up for entertainment. You are competing with such a deluge of entertainment that you need to be really stellar if you want to stand out and rise to the top. So we all get a little nostalgic for those slower beginnings sometimes. You know, you pick up Wheel of Time and you're watching Randolph Thor be a wool-headed farm boy, and it feels good. It feels familiar. It feels safe. It feels. We all love that. But you still got to do it right. You don't even have the leeway that Robert Jordan had when he was starting those. He was already a published author with a couple books under his belt, and he was also only writing 6 books. He didn't need quite the beginning. Or, enough skill can make some of these beginnings work. If you're good enough, I've picked up some books by authors where I read the beginning and I was like, well, that was enthralling. Why? Now that I think about it, that was really boring. Nothing happened. I barely even got any character. What engaged me there? And I'll look at it and I'll be like, oh man, they are a stellar writer. They have a way with prose that is just mesmerizing. Now, I don't want to tell you that you don't have that, because I don't know you. I haven't read your stuff for like 99% of you. I have not read your writing. I cannot guarantee that you don't have that. But I can tell you that I have read a lot of stories from authors who were convinced, no, I can do that. You're telling me I shouldn't do this, but I can. Just you watch. And then I picked up their story and went, no. Sorry, man. It doesn't work. So, you might be that good, but you might not want to gamble on that anyway. Because that's a long shot and a difficult gamble. And you've already got a hard enough task ahead of you. Or finally, no, I didn't. I encountered these every now and then too. I was talking about this with someone once and about the cinematic opening and why it was a problem, and they went, but the Wheel of Time opens that way. Even that very first book, it's wind in the misty mountains and flowing down through trees and irritating goats and disturbing sheepherded before it finally reached Randall Thor and mussed his hair and he got all shivery. And then we jumped into Rand's head and we started moving. The Wheel of Time, I think, is one of the primary causes, aside from movies, of that particular type of opening. That's not how the Wheel of Time series opens. That's not how most of those books open. First Wheel of Time books begins with a palace shaking with aftershocks of earthquakes and a crazy man stepping over the dead bodies of people he can't even see, looking for them, while his ancient enemy watches gleefully. Like it's a dramatic scene. It's still a bit slower scene, but it's not the cinematic opening. Now, he took a lot of leeway with those little openings. We've all grown to love them. We've all grown nostalgic for them, or at least grown to tolerate or just know that, hey, I can skip over this. It happens left and right. We've all done it, don't lie. But that happens a lot. You're thinking of an opening scene and it's like, but that did it, but it actually didn't. Iron Man did not begin too early. It began in medias res and then jumped to too early, which wasn't actually too early in that case. So remember, just because it's happening in books doesn't mean you can get away with it. You can try. There's nothing wrong with trying to stretch yourself. But know that if you want an easier way to do it, and that is a good idea, do things the easy way. It's already a hard enough job. Go the easy way now and then try to experiment later. And remember that they didn't all do that either, especially not with their first books. Elantris begins, Prince Raoden woke up unaware that he was damned for all eternity. Doomed, probably. It's brand new. It's great. It's a great hook right there where there's a scene of him waking up and looking and oh my gosh, these things are happening. It's not the most exciting action-packed scene, but it's a good scene. It's a first novel scene. And if you've only got one, if you've only got a couple that aren't that well read, then this is the way to go. So, in summary, because I've given you 5 beginnings here and 5 ways to fix them, but they do overlap quite a lot. So here's the main things to remember if you've been sleeping all this time. You're lucky, you just woke up right in time. First, in late, but not too late. Right? Don't start your story too early, but don't start it too late either. Try and find that golden middle ground where this is still interesting, we're not wasting too much time before we get to some nice juicy plot, but we're not starting too late and confusing our readers excessively. There's always going to be a little bit of confusion. Number 2, it's a book, not a movie. Don't try to be a movie. We have an unparalleled ability to get inside people's heads, both our characters and our readers. We have an unparalleled ability to get emotions across them. Almost nothing else can do that like we can in prose. So don't try and be something else. If they someday adapt your book into a movie and you get some sort of say in how it's done, then great. Go for that cinematic opening shot. Go for those beautiful action scenes, but don't do them here. Here, be a book, not a movie. Simplify, simplify. Follow Thoreau's advice. The simpler it is, the easier it's going to be to follow. We are a complicated, confusing series of genres. There's a whole lot of science, mumbo-jumbo techno-babble, or a whole lot of fantasy weirdness to explain in any given story. So don't lay it on too thick right from the beginning. Don't hammer your reader with, here's all the stuff you need to know right now, or here's some really cool action or settings. Just go, okay, I've got a character. You with me? Great. Here's what that character wants. You with me? Here's a little bit more. Okay, you're with me. Good. Here's where they're doing it. And here's it happening. Okay, we're all in the same boat. That's how you do it. Just baby steps. Just Bill Murray your way through that. Who is doing what and why? I just pretty much covered this. So it needs to be simple, and we need to have this core. This is what's going to carry a story. If it's a short story, if it's a flash story, if it's a novel, if it is a Brandon Sanderson doorstopper, we need to do a different way to print this book. Either way, you're still going to need the who, the what, and the why. And that'll move you along quite nicely. All right. We're going to have lots of questions. So, if you can hit one more before we go into questions. I've still got the summary up there. This is me, storypolisher@blogspot.com. Give me a couple hours and this presentation will be up there. You can download it. There are also a whole lot of tips on there about improving your prose, because there was a bit of misnomer in the description of this in the program. The number one problem I encounter, this is the number 2, is the boring beginnings. The number one problem is just a lot of people who don't quite know how to write as well as they think they do. And I've got a whole lot of tips on this. It's free. It doesn't even make me any money. I just want you all to enjoy it and to get better. So go to Story Polisher, get that. If you've got questions, if you're looking for an editor, you can try me at storypolisher@gmail.com, and I might have some time and I'd be happy to try and help you. So that is the end. Let's get some